Hello, everyone. Welcome to the lecture on antecedent control procedures. So again, we're going to be talking about interventions to decrease problem behavior. We talked about conducting a functional assessment to identify the reasons why the problem behavior occurs, right? To identify the antecedents, the conditions under which behavior has produced certain reinforcers, in this case, the consequence. So the conditions or the antecedent conditions are identified as well as the consequences. That's what we identify in the functional assessment. Now, after we describe and talked about functional assessment, then we talked about using extinction and differential reinforcement to put the problem behavior at a low rate, to place problem behavior at a low rate, and to increase desirable behavior respectively, right? So we talked about manipulating consequences, right? So the end of the three-term contingency. Today we'll be talking about how we manipulate the A, or the antecedent, the conditions or the variables that were present or that are present when the problem behavior occurs. Someone may refer to them as the variables that may trigger problem behavior. So how can we eliminate those variables or modify them so they no longer trigger the problem behavior? So antecedent control procedures, again, are based on the information that we obtain from the functional assessment. And it's one of the three non-aversive interventions. So we talked about extinction, then we talk about differential reinforcement on all different kinds of differential reinforcement, DRA, and then its subtypes, DRI and FCT, DRO, and DRL. And antecedent control or antecedent manipulation is another kind of functional assessment intervention, non-aversive intervention. So it's a functional-based, non-aversive intervention, not functional assessment, not functional-based, non-aversive intervention that, of course, is functional because it takes into account the information obtained on the functional assessment, and is not aversive because it doesn't utilize punishment or any kind of aversive stimulation. And what it does, it involves altering the environment in advance to prevent the target behavior from occurring, so to prevent the problem behavior. So we're talking about also increasing the probability that the desirable target behavior would occur while decreasing the probability of the undesirable behavior. So how can we create conditions so the person doesn't engage in the problem behavior, but engages in an alternative, more appropriate behavior instead, right? So how can we manipulate the environment? Now, one thing to mention, however, is just like with extinction that I said, well, we rarely use extinction alone. Oftentimes extinction is combined with some form of reinforcement of the appropriate behavior. So in this case, differential reinforcement. Antecedent manipulations are often part of a package in which someone may do a functional analysis, find what the function of the problem behavior is, and then try to not only manipulate the consequences, teach a new, so remove the consequence for the problem behavior, teach a desirable behavior, and also make some changes to the environment or to the antecedent conditions to decrease the likelihood that the problem behavior occurs, and of course, increase the likelihood that the appropriate behavior occurs. So oftentimes in a behavior intervention plan, we include antecedent manipulations and differential reinforcement, which involves extinction. So all those things are happening at the same time, right? The book splits into extinction, differential reinforcement, and antecedent control procedures, like many books in behavior analysis, for didactic purposes. So you understand every single component of the behavior intervention and what each component is essentially doing. Some people refer, the book talks about people referring to these groups of procedures as stimulus control procedures or situational inducement. Makes sense, stimulus control, because we're manipulating the stimuli that may control or evoke either the problem behavior or the appropriate behavior. So in situational inducement, we're trying to change the situation to induce behaviors, to induce certain appropriate behaviors. Here are some examples, right? So if you think about how can we manipulate the environment to increase the likelihood that certain behaviors would occur. Imagine trying to study more, which I'm sure is something that you've been trying to do Now with this pandemic, everyone's sort of stressed out. There are many things happening. You may be a little anxious and all. So how do you study more? Well, you could identify a couple of hours a day that would work best for you. So those 2 hours are maybe from 1 to 3 p.m. Are the best times that I can sit down. Maybe folks are taking a nap or I don't have anyone in the house. And those are the 2 hours that would work best for me. I can concentrate. I'm not hungry. I'm not going to try to be eating snacks. So that's the perfect time for me. In my case, I actually like to study or write or do whatever I need to do early in the morning, right? So for me, that's a really good time to get some work done. Recording those times in a planner, so that increases the likelihood that you would do it, right? Because when you're looking at your planner to decide, hey, what do I have today? You would see that during that 2-hour block, you're supposed to be sitting on your desk and studying for the class. Well, we can't do that now, but when we could get out of our houses, we could go study at the library. So you could go somewhere where it's quiet. There's less likelihood that there'll be disruption. So it's inducing the appropriate behavior. You may join a friend that studies a lot. So that friend may increase the likelihood that you will study too. I mean, if you join a friend that likes to chat and gossip and talk about other things, then that could be a problem because that friend might be inducing or triggering or evoking the problem behavior, not the appropriate behavior. If you study, however, with someone who's likes to study, is very serious, then you may be able to get the behavior going. That person is going to trigger the appropriate behavior. You can post a study schedule and alert your friends. Maybe, again, your friends can alert you when to study or vice versa. You can keep your books in your backpack so you have no excuse not to study. If you have any breaks throughout your day, so if you're going to campus and you have like a big window between one class and another, and if you book in your backpack, then you can read a chapter. But of course, if your book is not, then likely the situation is not going to induce any studying behavior. But if the book is there, well, then you might as well use it. Writing down tests, assignments, quizzes in a calendar, again, keeps you on track on when to study, when to, take those exams and whatnot. Canvas has a feature that does that for you, right? So you can go in and see everything that is due, everything you gotta complete, and if there are any exams coming up and so forth. So these are environmental events or situations that precede the behavior that try to get you to engage in the appropriate behavior and try to prevent you from engaging in the problem behavior. Again, you might write a contract with a counselor to commit to specific study times, right? So to get you to do what you're supposed to do. The contract may push you to do it, right? So here are some other examples that I took from a big a manual in applied behavior analysis that is very recent, published this year. So here's an example. Imagine a child, when directed to do homework, that child is non-compliant. Now, we would assume here that this behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement, right? So, hey, you have to do your homework. The child is not compliant, probably delays having to do the homework or escapes from the task. Now, one antecedent intervention is actually to provide individual choice. And we've known now that choices are reinforcing. People like choices. So if you can say, hey, do you want to do your homework or take a bath first? So essentially the kid is going to have to do the homework, but you might be manipulating the environment to get the homework to occur at a time that is a little better for the child. So maybe taking a bath is worse than doing the homework. So now the child is more likely to do the homework. Or maybe the child will take a bath, but then will have to do the homework as agreed. Here's another example. When requested to complete a math worksheet with 25 problems, student disrupts the class. Again, this is an example of a behavior that likely is maintained by negative social reinforcement, positive reinforcement. Social negative reinforcement, right? So in this case, removal or escaping the task. So why is the child engaging in behavior to escape from the task? Well, because the task is aversive, right? So if the task is aversive, then that will increase the likelihood of behaviors that would produce its removal. And maybe in this case, being disruptive, it's something that got to be reinforced by the removal of the task. So in this case, one solution which would involve trying to prevent problem behavior from even happening is, well, can we break down the task and make the task a little easier? So maybe if we break the task down into five worksheets with 5 problems each, the child might be able to complete 5 problems, one worksheet, take a little break, come back and do another 5, take a little break, and so forth, as opposed to having to sit down and do 25. Doing 5, it's likely way less aversive, way less boring than having to do 25. Now, here's another one, and a lot of parents do that, right? They've already done it, but probably didn't interpret it as antecedent manipulation. But, you know, when kids start crawling around the house, what parents do is they child-proof the house, right? So they make sure that they manipulate the environment to prevent the infant from encountering dangerous events. So the child might engage in problem behaviors like sticking her finger into the outlet, or maybe pulling the cords from the lamps and dropping the lamps and maybe breaking the lamps, maybe getting hurt by, getting hit by the lamps, all those bad things. You don't want your child to do that. So you can put a gate in the stairway, on the stairway, so the child doesn't go up and down and may fall. You plug the electrical outlets, you lock the cabinet floors, cabinet doors, so kids don't open the cabinets and maybe get some dangerous, products, chemical products. You remove the table lamps, etc. So you child-proof your house, so you're changing the environment to decrease the likelihood that those dangerous behaviors would occur. So again, antecedent manipulation, you're preventing problem behavior from happening, and then you're encouraging the more appropriate behavior to happen. Now, let's talk about, again, the definition of antecedent control procedures that involves the manipulation of some aspect of the physical or social environment to evoke a desirable response or to make a competing and desirable behavior less likely. Now, I'm going to talk about manipulation of discriminative stimuli or cues, manipulation of motivating operations, and manipulation of effort. Now, you can manipulate discriminative stimuli to both get the problem behavior to decrease and the appropriate behavior to increase, and the same is true for manipulating motivating operations and manipulating response effort. So to make this easier for you guys to understand, and I think the book does the exact same thing, is I'm going to talk about those 3 categories, SD, NMO, and effort manipulation, in the context of trying to get desirable behavior to increase. And then once we talk about that and give some examples, then I'm going to talk about those 3 categories again, but now in terms of trying to get problem behavior to decrease. So let's talk about how we manipulate SDs, MOs, and effort to increase behavior. Once I'm done with that, then we'll talk about SD, MOs, and response effort manipulations to decrease problem behavior. So let's first talk about the category of manipulating discriminative stimuli. Remember, problem behavior occurs, and it does so because it has produced reinforcement in the past. But does it produce reinforcement in the past every time it occurs? Well, likely, like any other behavior, the problem behavior only produces reinforcement under certain conditions, right? Not every time it occurs, and maybe it has to occur at certain locations. Maybe certain locations are more likely to evoke the problem behavior. For example, the non-compliance, the example that I gave earlier, occurs when the teacher gives the math worksheet. Doesn't happen in any other situation. So when the math worksheet is given, then problem behavior occurs. So there's some cues, so there's some environmental events. It only happens in the classroom. It doesn't happen during recess, or it may only happen in the presence of one teacher. It may only happen, a certain behavior may only happen at home, or it may only happen again with mom. It doesn't happen with dad. So there are cues, there are things in the environment that may help trigger the problem behavior. So again, like I said, both problem behavior has been reinforced in the presence of certain events, but the desirable behavior, behaviors that you want to see occurring, also may be triggered by specific environmental stimuli, or may have produced reinforcement in the past in the presence of certain environmental stimuli. Those stimuli, again, are defined as discriminative stimuli. And they are discriminative stimuli because they are stimuli in the presence of which behavior has been reinforced and in the absence of which behavior is not being reinforced. Now, we know that, again, if a stimulus is a stimulus in the presence of which behavior has been reinforced in the past, when this stimulus is present again, behavior is more likely to occur. Here's an example. Think about eating healthy foods. When are you more likely to eat healthy food? So imagine conditions that would trigger this specific behavior. Now, if your house and your work are full of healthy foods, then when you open the fridge, they're essentially cues to get you to eat that, right? Maybe you decide, when I have a craving for sugar, then instead of eating a chocolate bar, I'm going to eat some grapes, or I'm going to eat a banana, or I'm going to eat some sort of sweet fruit. Maybe what you do is you put those things right in your cabinet when, the chocolate used to be. So when you open up, you see the fruit, or right, when you open your fridge, you can see the fruit or the healthy snacks. So that's what you're going to eat. You can pack a healthy lunch. So again, it decreases the likelihood that you're going to buy something unhealthy. You could write a grocery list and stick to it. So again, that might serve as a cue or even a prompt for you to engage in the right behavior. I do that. I have an app that I share with my wife. So when I enter things there, she can open the app and see. So every time we go to the grocery store, we try to stick to the list so we don't go crazy and buy a bunch of stuff that, not only would spend a lot of money, but probably will be lots of junk food. And oftentimes we buy a lot of junk food when we're hungry. And I'll talk about that later when I talk about motivating operations. You may ask someone to remind you to eat healthy, and there would be some sort of response prompt, although I probably wouldn't recommend doing that. Your significant other will not be your significant other for very long. Imagine, every time you go to a restaurant and you're trying to order something, your significant other looks at you and says, well, maybe you should eat a salad instead. You probably get really pissed off about that. No one wants, anyway, you get it. Here's some other examples of presenting discriminative stimuli. Seating arrangement to facilitate conversation in a nursing home. So maybe those individuals living in the nursing home are not talking to one another. Let's, make the arrangement so they are more likely to talk to one another, put the seats closer together and so forth. Maybe if you don't floss, you can put a reminder, maybe a reminder on your phone, maybe something will pop up and serve to trigger the behavior that you want to occur. Again, we gave that example earlier. If you go to the library, it's an environment in the presence of which being quiet has been reinforced, and then talking out loud actually has been punished. So studying and reading and being quiet and concentrating, those are all behaviors that have been reinforced in the library. Therefore, the library is a discriminative stimulus in the presence of which those behaviors are more likely to occur. Try to study in front of the TV. Like, what behaviors occur or get reinforced in front of the TV? Watching the damn TV, right? So when you're looking at a TV and you see those shows are automatically reinforcing. They're fun. So you go to your TV room and then you think you're going to study. Of course, you're not going to concentrate. That's not the environment that concentrating and study has been reinforced. That's the environment that watching TV, playing video games, whatever it is, got reinforced, right? So that's something to think about. That's why, by the way, when people have insomnia, the suggestion is that you get out of bed and go do something. And then when you get tired, you go back to bed, because you don't want your bed to be a stimulus associated with being awake. You want the bed to be a stimulus associated with sleeping, right? So that's what you do when you go to bed. But when you go elsewhere is when you're awake. Same here, same thing here. So if you're going to study the library, it's or any studying environment, or in my case, coming to my home office, that's where I am right now. That's a place where I can study, I can read, I can concentrate, I can write. Very difficult for me to bring my laptop downstairs to the living room and try to work there, because I don't typically work in the living room. The living room is associated with entertaining friends, with whatever, but not with studying, not with working. How about presenting motivating operations? In this case, establishing operations that will establish the value of something as a reinforcer. Now, you're still manipulating antecedents, but it's a slightly different kind. So when you manipulate SDs, you're manipulating environmental events that are associated with availability of reinforcement, right? So there's more reinforcement for the behavior in the presence of those events. Here, we're talking about events that make the reinforcer for the desirable behavior more potent. And because the reinforcer for the desirable behavior is more potent, it makes the desirable behavior occur, right? So let's think about that. With study more often, if you post the scheduled tests, and if you post when to study, we talked about that, potentially being a cue. But one of the things they would also do is that you make the removal of those tests or the anxiety to study a reinforcer, right? So when you know something is coming up, when you know a deadline is coming up, you feel kind of tense. And that feeling of tension increases the value of its removal, of feeling less tense as a reinforcer. Well, how do you feel less tense? How you feel less guilty? By studying, right? So you feel guilty, you feel kind of tense, you feel stressed out about this exam that is coming, and that motivates you to do what? It motivates you to study. Why? Because when you study, you remove that anxiety, you feel less anxious, you feel more prepared. So it's an example of creating a motivational condition to get you to motivate you to do something. Here's some other examples. Kids that don't eat the healthy foods. Well, they might not eat the healthy foods because the healthy foods are not reinforcing. Well, how do you make the healthy foods more reinforcing? Well, when you're more hungry, when you haven't had food for a while, then food becomes more reinforcing. So, normally I wouldn't want to go around to eat broccoli, but if I haven't had food for a long time, maybe broccoli sounds pretty delicious, right? So if the kids haven't had any snacks before mealtime, then they might be more likely to eat the meal because the meal will be more reinforcing. Same with naps, right? If you want the kids to sleep more at night, well, maybe you start cutting the naps, because if they're napping, then the value of sleep as a reinforcer is diminished. But if there are no naps, then you increase the value of sleeping as a reinforcer. Therefore, sleeping should occur. Behavior contract with the professor to meet deadlines. We talked about that as well as some form of cues, but you could also interpret this as, the deadlines, again, aversive. So you're going to engage in behavior to meet the deadlines to avoid some sort of badness, right? You don't want to have to meet with your professor to tell him you didn't meet the deadlines. So again, as the deadlines are approaching, you engage in behavior to sort of avoid or postpone any aversive event that may come. So again, the deadline or the aversive event serves to evoke behavior that would remove it, right? Motivate you to engage in behavior that would remove those aversive events, and the removal of those aversive events will be a form of negative reinforcement. Now, if you work with children with disabilities, for example, and you use edibles in some cases as reinforcement for behavior, one of the things that you might want to do is, if the sessions are conducted immediately after lunch, for example, your session may be less effective, because the items that you're using as reinforcers are not going to be very powerful. right? But if you do it right before lunch, then food is more powerful, right? So manipulating when sessions would occur may change the value of the value of the reinforcer. I have a friend who's conducted several studies looking at um, pre-session access to a certain reinforcer and pre-session sort of restriction to a certain reinforcer. So if I'm using the iPad as a reinforcer, maybe to teach certain behaviors, then restricting the iPad throughout the day and only using the iPad during the sessions in which I'm trying to teach the behavior makes my sessions more effective, because the iPad now is a more powerful reinforcer. If, on the other hand, the kid has access to the iPad throughout the day, now why would a kid engage in some sort of effortful behavior to get the iPad? Like, why would the kid want to work with me? I'm going to ask the kid to do all those different things so she can get an iPad that she could otherwise get it without having to do anything when I'm gone. So once I'm gone, the parents are going to give the kid the iPad anyway. So why would the kid want to work with me? So maybe giving this sort of pre-session restriction to the iPad would increase the value of the iPad as a reinforcer, and that is the case for any reinforcer that you would want to use, right? Restricting access will make that reinforcer more powerful. The third characteristic here, the third manipulation of antecedent events is what we refer to as decreasing response effort, right? So manipulating the response effort for the behavior. So again, a behavior is more probable when it requires less effort than does another behavior. So if you have two options in life, if I were to ask you, like, listen, you can take an exam that has, I don't know, 10 easy questions and it's open book, versus an exam that has 10 or 20 hard questions and you cannot use your book. Now, I doubt that anyone is going to choose the 25 hard closed book exam. I mean, maybe some of you will, but the majority of you would choose the option that is less effortful, right? When things are easier, it's more likely for us to engage in that behavior, right? It's like, hey, I really want to eat sushi. Yeah, there's a great sushi restaurant in Rockland. It's like, well, that's far from me. I live close to campus, so I'm less likely to go to the restaurant. If I want to eat sushi, there's so many places that are close by. Why would I want to go all the way to Rockland to eat sushi? I mean, it has to be amazing for me to have to engage in this much effort. So again, if you decrease the effort, if you make things easier, people are more likely to engage in the behavior. Here's an example. Eating healthy, right? Now, if you think about eating healthy, people know they have to eat healthy. They know they shouldn't be eating junk food. They might not have enough money to even go to restaurants every day, but some folks might still do it or order out, because cooking a healthy meal is very effortful. You have to, find the recipe, a good one. You have to go to the store, buy all the ingredients. Then you have to get home. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're like starving. And now you're going to have to get all the ingredients out, get the recipe book, get all the pots and pans and whatnot. Then you're gonna cook the meal, which is also effortful, takes time. You're like starving, probably eating some chips and whatever as you're cooking the meal. Then the meal is ready. You eat it. It might be delicious, but now you have to clean the whole mess that you made. So it's a lot of effort to do that. So that's why over the past few years, we've seen a huge increase in not only delivery, food delivery sort of services, but also, so so the food comes to you, but also those food delivery services in which the recipe, the ingredients come to you. So that's an alternative to a healthy meal that you cook yourself, but is less effortful. I don't have to go to the grocery store. I don't have to find the recipe. The box comes with all the ingredients in it, and the recipe, and it tells me exactly what to do. And I use one of those services. And now one of the options is you have a menu every week, and then some items, they say it's a speedy item. So it means you can cook this meal. We send you the ingredients and you can cook this meal in less than 20 minutes. Like I catch myself selecting most of those items, right? Because even though they might not be the most delicious, I'm like, well, they're only going to take 20 minutes. So when I get home from work, when I'm done from work, I don't really want to cook something for, I don't want to have to spend 50 minutes cooking in the kitchen. So 20 minutes sounds much better than 50 minutes. So way less effort here. So I see myself engaging in this behavior more often, choosing the foods, the recipes that take less time to prepare. So here's some examples. So I just talked about eating healthy foods, but again, if I keep healthy foods in the house and I don't have junk food, so if I really feel like eating a cookie, I'll have to drive all the way to the grocery store to get it. And of course, less likely that that's going to occur. But if the healthy food is there, then I'm also increasing the likelihood that I'm going to eat the healthy food, right? Because it's less effortful. It's like, hey, the grapes are right here, so I'm just going to eat that instead of eating the cookie. So in this case, I'm decreasing the effort to eat the healthy food. But as I'm going to talk about soon with some other examples, in this one, I'm also increasing the response effort to eat junk foods. Now, people also like to cook during the week or on the weekend and then freeze the meals. And again, by freezing the meals, eating healthy is going to be less effortful because the meal is already ready. You can just microwave it, right? Here's some other examples. Putting a recycle box next to the desk, so you'll be more likely to throw the paper into the recycle bin than if you were to have the recycle bin far away. Maybe the office that you work, they have trash cans next to your desk, and there's just a large recycle bin. I don't know, in a common area. What you end up seeing, if that's the case, is that people are less likely to recycle than if they had individual recycle bins in their offices, right? Because here I have, a piece of paper, and I want to, maybe I have a piece of paper right here, and I want to throw it away. What I might do is I might, just, here's a piece of paper I have to throw away. What I might do is just, I'll do this and put it in the garbage can that is just next to me. I'm not going to go to the common area just to throw this tiny little piece of paper, right? But if, on the other hand, I had a recycle bin right here, then I'm more likely to throw it into the recycle bin because there's no effort, right? The effort is the same to throw it in the trash can or in the recycle bin. And as a matter of fact, and that's something that people have studied considerably in the literature, how putting trash cans or bins in different location increases the likelihood that people would, throw the garbage into the garbage bin, or throw the paper, the recyclables into the recycle bin. And nowadays, most places, if you go to a music festival, right, there are trash cans everywhere, and also recycle bins and compost bins and whatnot. So you have all those different categories, and they're all in the same location. So there's no effort involved in recycling all those different products. So again, in this case, the recycle bin is both a cue, because in the presence of the recycle bin, throwing it in the bin, it may have been reinforced, but also it decreases the effort of recycling, right? It makes recycling easier. Some people are being trying to increase carpooling. So I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes there are lots next to the highway entrance, so people can park their cars and try to meet with folks and carpool. Again, a way to decrease the effort. There are high occupancy vehicle lanes on interstates, the carpool lane, right? Again, if I carpool, which is the desirable behavior, I get to work faster because I can use the carpool lane. So again, the behavior that you're trying to increase is carpooling, and you're manipulating the antecedent by creating this carpool lane, right? Again, I talked about books in the backpack. If you have books in the backpack, there'll be cues, but they also decrease the effort. Like, if I need to study and I have to go all the way to the library to check out the book, oh, well, I'm not going to do that. Very effortful. But if the book is right here, all I have to do is like reach to, my backpack, then I can get the book. Well, then I'm more likely to engage in the behavior. This is something Starbucks has done, right? So how do they get you to, drink Starbucks all the time? If you have the need for a coffee, there's going to be a Starbucks on your right or on your left, or probably both on your right and on your left, right? So they're essentially decreasing the likelihood that it's going to, decreasing the likelihood of going to another coffee shop because it's less effortful to go to Starbucks, right? It might be more effortful to go to the coffee shop that you like. Because I really want a coffee and I can drive all the way to Temple on K Street, or I can just go to the Starbucks that is right here. So you may opt to drink a coffee that maybe not as good just because it's right there next door. Those three categories, removing SDs, manipulating SDs, EOs, and response effort, are also used to decrease the probability of the undesirable behavior. So in this case, instead of presenting SDs for the desirable behavior to occur, you're removing the SDs or the cues that are triggering the problem behavior. You're eliminating the motivation to engage in the problem behavior, and you're increasing the effort, because if you make the behavior more effortful, it's less likely to occur. So you're making the response, the behavior more effortful, right? The problem behavior becomes more effortful, and if the problem behavior takes a lot of effort, then you're less likely to engage, or the person is less likely to engage in the problem behavior. So let's talk about removing environmental events or cues to decrease problem behavior. Now, in the absence of the discriminative stimulus, the problem behavior, the competing behavior, is less likely. And we're using the term competing because the problem behavior competes with the appropriate behavior that should be occurring instead, right? So eating the unhealthy foods. Well, if you remove the presence of the unhealthy foods, then you're less likely to, eat them. You're not going to be prompted by that thing that is right in front of you. If it's not there, then you might not even think about it. How about slacking off? Remove the presence of friends. So go somewhere else, because your friends are discriminative stimuli for making jokes. When you make jokes, your friends laugh. When you talk about sports, your friends, pay attention. When you talk about, your boyfriend or your girlfriend, your friends, give you some attention. So your friends reinforce behaviors other than studying. Therefore, in their presence, you're more likely to talk about things that are unrelated to studying. So, just don't be around your friends, because when you're around your friends, you're not going to study. You're going to slack off. That's what they're discriminative for. Same with the TV, video game, phone. I already talked about that. Those are things that would evoke, if you're in the TV room, you're going to be more likely to watch TV. If video game is right there, you're going to be more likely to play video game. And if you have your phone, you're more likely to play with your phone. That's just the way it goes. When I'm trying to write, for example, or prepare class, I actually turn the Wi-Fi off on my computer, because otherwise I keep getting the sounds of emails being delivered, and then every 2 seconds I get an email, and then I just go check the email and do other stuff. So I just make sure that if the Wi-Fi is off, then there's no discriminative stimuli for me to go and check my email, or go and check Facebook or whatever, right? Social media. Same with my phone. I leave my phone in a different room, so no one can text me, and I don't get distracted. Those are some other examples. Imagine kids are fighting at a restaurant. Well, why do kids fight? Because when I fight with if I'm kid B and I fight with kid A is going to react to what I did, and that serves as a reinforcer. Of course, the kid is going to do something, and I'm going to react to it, and that's going to serve as a reinforcer. So we're discriminative stimuli for each other to engage in sort of fighting. So separate them so they are not in the presence of the discriminative stimuli that is going to evoke fighting. Same with, in the classroom. Now, if you don't want to eat unhealthy food, don't drive past, fast food. on the way home. Sometimes hard to do that, right? Because they're everywhere. Keeping TV, cell phone silent when trying to sleep, right? Because they might be discriminative for checking your email or checking social media, because every time you do that, there's going to be something that is going to be reinforcing, right? So your phone makes you engage in those behaviors. How about eliminating the motivation to engage in the problem behavior? Well, again, without an established operation, the reinforcer for the problem behavior is not going to be very effective, right? So if the reinforcer is not effective, you're less likely to engage in the problem behavior, or the person is less likely to engage in the problem behavior. Here's some examples, right? If the problem behavior is buying a lot of crappy junk food, if you go shopping on a full stomach, then maybe the crappy junk food is not going to be as reinforcing. You're going to look at all those cookies and you're going to be like, they don't sound very good. They don't look very good. I don't know if I want to eat them. I'm pretty full, right? I can't even imagine eating a cookie right now. And then you might not buy it. But if you go to the store, and you haven't eaten for a long time, then you're gonna just buy everything you see because that cookie is going to look really good, right? You're gonna want to buy all the bad stuff. Other thing that people may do is they may change the curriculum to reduce problem behavior maintained by escape. We talked about that earlier, when you can make things easier. If the problem behavior occurs to remove the aversive event, well, then just don't present the aversive event. Make the situation less aversive, more fun. So there's no reason for the problem behavior to occur. If the problem behavior is occurring to remove something bad, well, don't present something bad. Then the problem behavior won't occur. So you can reduce the rate of demands, or you can make the tasks less aversive, make the tasks a little easier, introduce the difficulty a little slower. You can give attention on contingent. So if the person is engaging in problem behavior because in the past the behavior produced attention, you did a functional analysis and you found out, hey, problem behavior produces attention. This kid is fighting because the brother attends to him, or this kid is fighting to get the things that she wants. Well, how about you get the kid what she wants before she fights? And that's what we call non-contingent tangible. How about you give attention to the kid before she even engages in the problem behavior? Enrich the environment, talk to the kid, make the kid happy here, so the kid doesn't have to engage in problem behavior. Or in the case of problem behavior maintained by escape, give a lot of breaks so the kid doesn't have to run away when a task is presented, right? The kid already got a bunch of breaks, so breaks are not reinforcing anymore. We talked about providing choices already. Imagine you have self-injury behavior that occurs to relieve some pain. Kid has a headache, or individual has a headache, engages in some sort of, self-injury, and therefore somehow relieves the pain. Well, maybe if you take headache medication, the motivation to engage in SIB will go away. If for some reason the SIB might be related to noise or light levels being too noisy or too bright, well, if you make the environment less noisy and if you make the environment less bright, there'll be no motivation to engage in the problem behavior. How about effort? You can make a problem behavior decrease by increasing the effort. Make it harder for the problem behavior to occur, right? Because the behavior that requires more effort than another behavior, then that behavior is less likely to occur, the one that requires more effort. And we can increase by manipulating the environment somehow. Again, if you want to study more often, go to the library, because it takes more effort to engage with friends or party as opposed to studying in your room. So we talked about, again, going to the library, having different functions here, one of which is reducing the effort of engaging in the problem behavior, which is talking to your friends. If you put your cell phone away, and I really want to check my cell phone instead of recording this lecture, well, my cell phone will not be very close. I'll have to go all the way downstairs to go get my cell phone. So I might be like, oh, well, I'll just check my messages later. Too effortful. I don't want to go down the stairs again today. So let's say eating more healthy foods. The competing behavior. So if I get rid of the unhealthy foods, it takes a lot of effort to go purchase them. So, eating the unhealthy foods, right? So if I get rid of them, then when I want to go eat unhealthy foods, which is the problem behavior here, it's going to be effortful. I have to go all the way to the store to buy ice cream or to buy cookies. It's like, oh, well, I'll just eat the fruit that is in the refrigerator instead because it's too effortful to engage in the unhealthy behavior. But if it's easy to engage in the unhealthy behavior, if there are donuts everywhere in my house, cookies everywhere in my house, that's what I'm going to eat because it's the easy thing to do. So make it hard, make it difficult for you to engage in the problem behavior. Some other examples of increasing response effort: if you sit the victim away from the aggressor, then again, it'll be hard for the aggressor to aggress. So you might decrease aggression by doing that. If you keep a trash can away from the desk and the recycle box or the recycle bin closed, remember, it's going to be, if I want to throw the piece of paper, where is it? Here. If I want to throw the piece of paper in the trash can, it's going to be effortful, and it's going to be less effortful to throw it in the recycle bin. So what am I going to do? Throw it in the recycle bin because that's the easy thing to do. There's this thing called variable pressure accelerator that they designed for some cars, and that's being studied. It hasn't really been used, I don't think, where as you start speeding, it becomes harder for you to press the gas, to press the accelerator, right? So it increases the effort. So what's the problem behavior? Speeding, right? You make speeding hard. It's like, oh, it's really hard to speed because it makes the accelerator difficult to depress. So that's kind of interesting because it decreases speeding. Now, some interventions, as I mentioned in some of my examples, I use sometimes the same examples because some interventions may increase the effort and also remove the SD at the same time, right? So you're doing all those different things at the same time. Now, one of the things that I like you to do as you're watching the video, and if you read, hopefully you read the chapter and then you watch the video. If you haven't read the chapter, I would suggest stopping here, reading the chapter, and then coming back and really thinking about selecting a behavior, thinking about a behavior in your life that you would like to increase, and maybe a behavior that you would want to decrease. Maybe they're related, right? So it's like, well, I like to exercise more, and the behavior that I want to decrease is I want to decrease eating unhealthy foods, or sitting around maybe and watching TV. So I want to exercise more, be more active, and I want to decrease the sitting around or the inactivity. Or I want to increase eating healthy foods and I want to decrease eating unhealthy foods. Or think about something you want to do. Then, based on the lecture that you listened to today, try to come up with 2 strategies. How can you manipulate cues or discriminative stimuli to increase the behavior that you want to increase and to decrease the problem behavior? And how can you do the same with the response effort? Can you change your environment to make it easier for you to engage in the behavior that you want to engage in? And maybe can you make it harder for the problem behavior to occur, right? If it's exercising, some people say like, hey, maybe you can have a couple of weights at home. So maybe you can, get an app so you can exercise, or maybe you can put on your schedule. In addition to that, put it on your schedule, to exercise the same time every day. That's what I do. If I exercise at different times during the day, I never do it because I would wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm tired, I'll exercise in the afternoon. And then the afternoon arrives and I'm like, oh, I'm too tired, I'll exercise tomorrow morning. And that keeps happening, right? So I exercise every day at 7 a.m. and that's it. If I miss it, then I miss it. I'll have to do it the next day. But then it's in my calendar and I make it easy. by manipulating the environment in all sorts of different ways. So again, select the behavior that you want to increase, the behavior that you want to decrease, and then how would you use SD manipulation and response effort manipulation to increase and decrease these behaviors. Then I'm going to be posting a video on YouTube that will talk about how antecedent manipulations have, how people have manipulated antecedents in marketing to get you to buy and eat certain foods. So it's very cool, short video. Okay, so that has been 50 minutes, and trying to time the lecture now so it doesn't exceed the time. And I'll see you guys again on Wednesday. All right. Goodbye.